Okay, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you all for joining us today. My name is Richard James. I'm part of the marketing team here at Acculab, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items just so you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of an attendee interface. You should see something like that on your screen. On the left-hand side of the screen is the webinar viewer, where you'll see today's presentation. And to the right is the control panel. That's where you can ask questions and select the audio mode. This is a close-up of the control panel. This will collapse automatically when not in use. But if you do want to keep it open, you can click the View menu and then uncheck the Auto Hide Control Panel option. We'd love to hear your questions, so you will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing them into the box at the bottom of the control panel. You can send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll collect all of these up and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. If I could also add that today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending you the recording in the next 24 to 48 hours. So I'd like to introduce the presenters for today's webinar. First up, we have Ian Colville, who is the VoiceSentry product manager. Then we have David Grant, who is one of our professional services consultants. And last but not least, we have Chris Lutzaris, who is Acculab's professional services manager. Here you can see the agenda for today's webinar. I'll just leave that there for a few seconds so you can see what topics we'll be covering. Okay, just before we start, it'd be great to get a feel for what your thoughts are on the subject of voice biometrics. So I'd like to run a small anonymous poll to see why people are here and what you're looking to get out of this session. So it's just 3 multiple choice questions. So I'm going to launch the first one now. So the first question is, do you currently use voice biometrics? So if you could check one of those options. I'll just give everyone a few seconds to complete that. Okay, and then the next question. Are your customers asking about voice biometrics? So again, we'll just wait for a few seconds to give everyone a chance to answer that. Okay, and the last one. How well do you understand voice biometrics? Now we've given you 4 options there, so if you could check next to the one which suits you the best. Okay. Great. Thank you very much for doing that for us. If we do have time, we might be able to get back to those results in the Q&A session later on. So first off, I'm going to show a short video that just gives you a brief overview of VoiceSentry.
Is your business aware of the escalating security threat of identity theft? Criminals target personal credentials, such as PIN numbers and passwords, to carry out many kinds of fraud. It's a problem that's increasing every year, and it's costing companies billions. Which is why it's critical that you provide secure access to user data, accounts, and services. Aculab's VoiceSentry voice biometric system helps you mitigate your fraud risk. But there's more to it than just security. Like any business, you're competing in terms of offering the best possible customer experience. VoiceSentry helps improve your service by making the identification and verification process simple and convenient. It does this by replacing the frustrating inquisition of security questions with a strong and intuitive voice verification that reduces the average authentication time by up to 2/3. It also frees up your agents, meaning they can be more engaged in dealing with your clients. All of this adds up to a 4-fold win for you and your customers and gives your business a rapid return on investment. VoiceSentry from Aculab, the easy and effective speaker verification solution.
Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ian Colville to take you through the next section of the webinar.
Hi everybody, good afternoon. As Richard said, this is Ian Colville speaking. So check out this dude. Here's an anonymous dude that wants to steal your data, your customers' data, anyone's data. Security is how you protect your business against bad guys like this. There's no doubt that security is an important issue. You'll find evidence for that in the Contact Center Association's February 2018 report called Top Customer Service Challenges. Managers were asked, if you had one area for investment and improvement in 2018, what would it be? The overwhelming majority response from those people was better security. So here's how bad the situation has been, at least in the UK anyway. 1 in 700 UK call center calls is a fraudulent call. In the UK, call centers lose, on average, 51 pence per call. That means for every million calls, there's over 500,000 lost to fraud. According to the Financial Fraud Action UK, 2016 fraud losses totaled nearly £800 million, that is. In 2017, there were almost 90,000 cases of identity fraud in just the first 6 months. And well over half of confirmed data breaches involve leveraging weak, default, or stolen passwords. And according to CFAS, the UK's not-for-profit fraud prevention organisation, fraud is reaching epidemic levels. So voice biometrics then is a technology that can help you to mitigate these kinds of security risks. Contact centers are a segment that is increasingly susceptible to identity theft and associated fraudulent activity. Here, voice biometrics offers an additional level of protection. If you replace the intrusive, time-consuming inquisition of security questions with an intuitive, voice-driven interface, you can reduce average verification time by up to 2/3. In addition, you shouldn't underestimate the motivational influence on staff if they no longer need to pose the same tedious questions day after day after day. Voice biometrics will rescue them from that purgatory. Furthermore, as customer care is so important, the double benefit of security and convenience makes for a far better authentication experience for customers, clients, and subscribers. Faster authentication means convenience for the caller and time/cost savings for the contact center. That's got to be a clear win-win. So in summary, the benefits of speaker verification in the contact center are 4-fold. Security risks are mitigated, caller authentication is far more simple and convenient, agent morale and motivation is greatly improved, and average call time, and hence average call costs, are reduced. In addition to all of that, the return on investment is unquestionable, as we shall see. In the public service domain, the use of voice biometrics to verify identity can be applied in several ways. Those include establishments overseen by governmental agencies, such as correctional facilities. I don't know if anybody recognizes the image on the slide there, a still from a film in the 1970s, Hoffman and McQueen there. I did hear that they were going to do a remake, starring a couple of bit-part Russian actors, one of whom was rumored to be a perfume salesman. Anyway, in many jails or island prisons, prisoners are allowed to make phone calls to their relatives. Those privileges are typically provided by third-party service providers who must establish the identity and entitlement each time a prisoner wants to make a call. As PINs and passwords can be shared, stolen, or fraudulently acquired, a more secure method is needed. It's a good idea then to use voice biometrics to limit access to those who can be securely authenticated. Speaker verification can also be used to monitor the whereabouts of prisoners, keeping them on a short leash, if you like. If they are granted privileged access to certain areas, speaker verification can be used to implement automated checks, i.e. checks that require a voice response as confirmation of presence and identity. For healthcare applications, such as those related to electronic health record systems, a layer of authentication that meets the security requirements of regulations like the GDPR and HIPAA, for example, is surely beneficial. One of the facilities that EHR solutions providers make available to their clients, and hence patients, is patient portals. Portals give patients access to their personal medical data, including prescriptions and appointments. With secure access in mind, voice biometrics provides a layer of security that prevents unauthorized logins. It also helps to reduce exposure to data breaches and mitigates the economic consequences of medical identity theft. Speaker verification enhances privacy and security in line with regulatory demands. The issue of privacy, especially in the healthcare market, is a powerful driver for using right-party authentication to facilitate personal information sharing. That's also the case when using speech-enabled automated outbound calling. That's because it's necessary to make sure that the person answering the call is the one to whom the healthcare provider needs to speak. So you can verify the identity of the person taking the call very easily if you use speaker verification. Speaker verification can also be used to authenticate people passing security checks in a number of different environments, anywhere really where security checks are involved. Access security is hardly less important than fears of fraud, and when it comes down to public safety, it's arguably of greater concern. Identity theft leading to a data breach or to unauthorized access is a concern, no matter how you count the cost. Okay, so getting back to fraud prevention, this is more than a regulatory issue, it's also a brand issue. So while fraud certainly causes losses to a business, along with the threat of regulatory fines, the risk of losing customers' confidence due to lax security is at least as great. If accounts are compromised, no business can be immune to the attendant bad publicity. If businesses are to introduce stronger identity verification methods and even consider abolishing passwords, well-managed voice biometrics is a good option. It's an excellent method of preventing misuse or the compromise of credentials. Unlike iris recognition and fingerprint scanning, for example, biometric speaker verification requires no special memory skills or hardware. And furthermore, it's the only biometric that can be used remotely over the phone. As voice biometrics is completely natural for the user, security no longer has to be at the expense of convenience. So earlier I spoke of a fourfold benefit, and in this and the next slide, I'll endorse those benefits effectively. I covered security in the previous slide, so let's take that as a given. Voice biometrics is an effective method of strong authentication, enabling businesses to protect themselves and their customers from attacks by fraudsters. Identity theft is high profile, and businesses have an obligation to mitigate fraud and security risks and to be seen to provide stronger security. And the aforementioned CCA research report, another of the challenges emphasized by respondents was making technology choices that deliver a joined-up customer service experience. That means supporting customers to self-serve where they can, but also offering speed and convenience, which generates efficiency and accuracy. So here are some more benefits then. They're focused on the contact center, and that's because it's a key sector. Voice naturally lends itself to remote authentication scenarios. With speaker verification, callers can be authenticated quickly, conveniently, and securely, in contrast to agent-led identification and verification. I'm sure you'll agree that that can be a prolonged activity. It can take several minutes in some cases. Reducing the time for ID and V reduces frustration and leads to more engaged, motivated agents. Across the board, a high percentage of callers are authenticated via contact center agents. That means the opportunity for cost saving by speeding up that manual workload is extremely significant. How much verification can be speeded up depends on the business circumstances, but if the ID&V duration can be reduced, the organization saves costs. It becomes more cost effective and it gets a decent return on investment into the bargain. As you'll hear in a wee bit more detail in the next slide, speaker verification can have a positive beneficial impact on a range of contact center metrics, including call handle time. Apologies for the pause there, I was just having a slurp of coffee. That's what we call liveness detection. Here we go again with the contact center. I'm not going to apologize for that because it's the classic example. However, these principles apply to any application of the technology. So here are a few contact center metrics that some of you should recognize. Let's take average handle time, of which average talk time is a component. If it's important for the contact center to get the most from the latter, in the sense of productive time spent talking to the client, while not unduly increasing the former, one way of achieving that would be to cut out unnecessary dialogue between agent and customer. Reducing agent-led ID&V time is one way of doing just that. So the time spent on ID&V can be extensive, and time spent on asking repetitive security questions can be far better spent on dealing with the customer's query. Cut down on those times and you've got a happier customer, a more motivated agent, and a more productive call center. Adherence to schedule is relevant if the contact center has targets for calls per day or something on those lines. Cut out the unnecessary and agents will have a better chance of sticking to their targets. Cost per call and cost per transaction are much the same thing. It depends on what's important for the contact center. However, if we can reduce the time spent on a call to only what is productive, the call is going to be cost effective in the purest sense. Cutting out agent-led ID&V means reducing the unproductive cost of the call and/or the transaction. So just to be clear, cutting the time means cutting the cost. Of course, the other benefit to be gained from reducing the time spent on ID&V is that talent will be freed up to focus on the goal of delivering outstanding customer service. Note that all of those benefits are applicable to other markets and sectors. I'm sure you can relate them to your own business or that of your customers. So here's an illustration to show you how a return on investment in speaker verification can be gained really, really quickly. This might help you to sell voice biometrics as a technology. Hopefully it will. We've got a hypothetical contact center taking about 500,000 inbound calls per year. That might be a lot for some, not so much for others. Certainly there are Aculab customers offering inbound services that handle around 600,000 calls a year. So this is a realistic figure. Typically the proportion of inbound calls that need ID&V is about 68%. And that figure is taken from contact center reports by the researchers Contact Babel. So this shows that over 300,000 calls need to go to agents for ID&V, and that's before the caller can get on with what they want to do. The average time for agent-led ID&V in the UK is just over a minute. It's pretty much the same in the US. Again, using UK figures, the cost of that half minute is just under 40 pence a call. So if you reduce the ID&V time by 2/3, i.e. you shave it down to 1/3 of the time, to around 10 seconds, you shave the costs by about 23 pence per call. If you then multiply the per call saving by the number of calls, you get an annual cost saving of just over £77,000. You can look on that as a cost saving. You can look on it as freeing up talent to deliver outstanding customer service. You can look at it as enabling the contact center to employ a couple more agents. You can look at it as enabling the contact center to deal with more customers without having to deploy more agents. In lots of ways, it equates to a saving. Now here's the punchline. Assuming that your voice biometrics vendor is licensing the technology for an annual subscription, and assuming, for the sake of argument, that the fee is equal to or less than the saving we've just seen, the ROI is going to be less than 12 months, year after year after year. Ain't that an ROI to die for? So I've been representing ROI as a purely financial measure, but there can be other non-bean counter benefits. And those might be the security outcomes, enrollment take-up, customer satisfaction, for example. It's fair to say that if there are some results with a low confidence score, those calls will be referred for manual ID&V. That's just best practice. But will that affect the ROI? Here's what really improves the ROI. The ROI period is significantly reduced if you factor in additional savings, as shown in the following bullet points. If you factor in the savings from having less cases of fraud, i.e. less is lost to fraudsters, the ROI calculation comes tumbling back down. If, on top of that, you factor in the savings from not having to pursue fraudsters through a legal process, the ROI is again reduced and speaker verification becomes akin to a no-brainer. Furthermore, if there are less cases of fraud to investigate, the customer will be paying out less in compensation or reimbursement, and that reduces the ROI even more. In some cases, they might even get a negative ROI, a no-brainer if ever there was one. So that's me for now. Thanks very much for your attention. I'm going to hand you over to my esteemed colleague David Grant, and he'll take you through the VoiceSentry architecture.
Thanks, Ian. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to run through the features and benefits of VoiceSentry and give you an outline of how easy it is to integrate it into your existing telephony infrastructure. VoiceSentry has been designed from the ground up to be language independent. This means that multilingual users can all enroll on the same platform. So, for example, an English-speaking user could enroll and verify by saying a phrase such as, "With VoiceSentry, my voice will let me in," while a French speaker could enroll by saying, "Avec VoiceSentry, ma voix me vérifie." VoiceSentry has also been designed to be device independent. So whether your customers call in via their mobile, landline, or hands-free device, they only require a single user voice print to be verified in all cases. VoiceSentry itself can work in a number of verification modes. These are text dependent, so that's where a fixed passphrase is used. For example, with VoiceSentry, my voice will let me in. Text independent, so that's where verification is performed on conversational speech. And in this way, multiple verifications could be performed through the lifetime of a call, specifically around high-value transactions. And finally, text prompted. This is where speech recognition is employed along with speaker verification to create a multi-factor authentication solution. This adds an extra level of security since the prompted words can be different each time a caller uses the system. VoiceSentry comes with multi-language support for simple speech recognition built in. However, it's also possible to use an incumbent ASR provider along with VoiceSentry if required. And when capturing digits in such a scenario, it's also possible to fall back to DTMF detection. So as we've said, speaker verification is a very convenient and natural method of authentication and is also extremely secure. However, the use of additional factors along with speaker verification can provide similarly rapid authentication while providing an increased level of security. So in this slide, we can see caller 1 is identified via their CLI and verified via speaker verification. Caller 2 has an additional text prompted factor where each time they call in, they're asked to repeat a random word or digit while also being verified by a speech recognition. And the third caller has the ability to fall back to DTMF recognition. This could be used where a text prompted solution is using digits. And if a caller had a speech impediment, for example, their voice could still be used to develop a voice print. However, the speech recognition software may not be able to capture what they're saying, so fallback to DTMF allows the additional random digits to be captured and verified. In all the above scenarios, authentication takes the same time for each caller, even when additional factors are employed to obviously allow increased security. VoiceSentry is provided as a VM image for easy installation within the deployment environment of your choice, be that hosted within a data center or on-premise on your own servers. VM images are currently provided for vSphere and Hyper-V, and we also look to provide hosted services within AWS. All images provide access to VoiceSentry's advanced voice verification services, along with the additional speech recognition and digit detection services. Once installed, VoiceSentry can either be configured via a web interface or REST API. The administrative REST interface enables you to easily integrate the management of VoiceSentry nodes into third-party administrative applications, and the verification features of VoiceSentry are also provided via a REST API. This means that you can easily add voice biometric features into your current solution using the programming language of your choice. So let's look at an example of how VoiceSentry can be integrated into your existing solution. This slide shows an existing scenario with agent-led identification and verification. As mentioned earlier, such verification steps can be prone to both fraud and customer frustration due to loss of passwords and PINs. VoiceSentry can easily be integrated into the existing platform via the REST APIs. Such an integration will require some changes to prompts on the existing IVR for enrollment and verification. So once integrated, the call flow would be something as follows. The customer makes an identity claim via the IVR platform. So for example, they enter an account number. The IVR then prompts them to repeat a passphrase, which is then recorded. And then the audio recording is sent to VoiceSentry for verification using the REST APIs. VoiceSentry can then respond with a verification response, and callers can be directed to the service they require. Offloading the verification process in this way reduces the IDMV workload on the agents, as we've talked about, and frees them up to deal with the real customer queries. So for the more technical attendees of this webinar, I just wanted to show you a quick API example so that you can see how simple it is to integrate VoiceSentry. On this slide, you can see an example curl request for performing a verification. With the request, we pass an access key, an enrollment ID, and obviously the WAV file containing the audio on which we want to perform the verification. The access key and enrollment ID tell VoiceSentry which VoicePrint to use for the verification. And once VoiceSentry has processed the audio, a JSON response will be sent back containing the verification confidence. Any response above 1 means VoiceSentry has correctly verified the user. VoiceSentry is highly scalable, giving it the ability to handle thousands, if not millions, of verifications per hour. A single VoiceSentry node is a standalone speaker verification system with the ability to handle a fixed verification throughput. Increased verification throughput is increased verification throughput is required, scaling can be achieved through a process of clustering VoiceSentry nodes, where each node is an individual virtualized instance. Once clustered, verification requests can be load balanced across nodes within a cluster. Adding additional nodes into a cluster scales throughput linearly, allowing you to easily manage system resource requirements. And as we'll see in subsequent slides, VoiceSentry's design is underpinned by an innovative distributed architecture using cluster-wide database replication and licensing. This design offers a high level of resilience and redundancy. Within a clustered deployment, there is no single point of failure. Each node itself is an active master, meaning that if for any reason a single node fails, the other nodes in the cluster will continue to function and process requests. Also note, when clustered, administration of the entire system can be managed remotely through any node within that cluster. VoiceSentry is licensed based on the number of verification requests required per day. So, if within your current platform you perform agent-led IDMV on 10,000 calls per day, you would require a 10,000 unit verification license. For redundancy, these licenses can be distributed across multiple nodes within a cluster. And as we can see in this slide, the full verification capacity is available cluster-wide. So in this deployment, each node has an N channel license installed, and the full capacity of 3 N licenses are available across all nodes within the cluster. Distributing licenses in this way also means that if a node would become partitioned from the cluster for any reason, it could remain active and continue to process requests. When clustered, each individual node contains an identical up-to-date replicated copy of the entire VoiceSentry database. When an enrollment is made via one node, a VoicePrint is added to the database and immediately replicated across all nodes within the cluster. Replication provides cluster-wide data backup and a high degree of data persistence, since there is multiple copies of the entire database. This architecture offers greater resilience than a single back-end database, as all nodes hold what is effectively a backup copy of the entire database. For providers offering services to multiple clients through a cloud-based platform, the multi-tenanted capability of VoiceSentry presents an ideal solution. A provider of a contact center solution, for example, can offer speaker verification as a per-customer security option, simply and conveniently. Each user has full independent control over the creation of the datasets against which enrollments and verification attempts are performed, and all tenants have zero visibility or access to other tenant accounts or their data. Right, I'll now hand over to my colleague Chris, who will take you through a bit more information about Voiceprints and their security.
Thank you very much, David. So there's a common misconception about the Voiceprint that we use and store in VoiceSentry. So what I'll do is I'll touch on that over the next few slides. A speech recording is basically a waveform like you see on your screen. It consists of the signal from a microphone which is plotted against time. This can potentially be used to identify someone, but it's not the Voiceprint that we store. There's still a lot of processing to be done on that. So we use some clever mathematical and statistical methods to capture the different frequencies of the waveform and plot that onto a relevant spectrogram. Yet again, this is not what we refer to as the Voiceprint. We further process the spectrogram to capture various other parameters. And even at this stage, we do not have the Voiceprint yet. But believe me, we are getting close, I promise. We then combine the various voice parameters from different speech samples and calculate statistics from them. And these statistics are what make up the Voiceprint. VoiceSentry operates in a secure environment, so it's not possible for Voiceprints to be accessed from another system. And keeping that in mind, and because I think you've earned it, sitting through all those slides, I'll finally show you what a Voiceprint looks like. So this is what a Voiceprint looks like in VoiceSentry, and as you can see, it's basically a set of coded numbers, which mean absolutely nothing outside of the VoiceSentry system. So by this stage, the voice recording has been processed in such a manner that it's similar to one-way encryption. It's not possible to reconstruct any original voice recording from the Voiceprint. And remember that nothing more than the Voiceprint is stored within VoiceSentry. So just to recap, and as David mentioned before, VoiceSentry was designed from the ground up. So for security and GDPR compliance, that's very beneficial. Voiceprints are not accessible outside of the VoiceSentry system, and even if they were, they would be of no use to any fraudster. No audio waveforms are stored within VoiceSentry, and audio cannot be reconstructed from the Voiceprints. Furthermore, VoiceSentry does not have information regarding any speaker's true identity. So it merely uses an anonymous identifier for each of the Voiceprints and determines whether a particular sample of speech matches that Voiceprint identifier. So if there's one thing you want to take away today, just remember that Voiceprints are inherently secure. So no verification system on Earth is 100% accurate, which leads us to two types of verification errors. The first is false rejection rate, and this is basically where the biometric system fails to verify or identify an authorized person. And then the other is a false acceptance rate, which is where the biometric system incorrectly accepts an access attempt by an unauthorized person. The default sensitivity of a system can be adjusted to decrease one of these errors, but that would have a detriment to the other error rate. For example, having a system which uses voice biometrics as a method to filter users wanting to know, say, when they have a doctor's appointment, that system can afford a higher false acceptance rate than a system filtering callers who want to perform bank transactions. The first scenario would sacrifice confidence for ease of use, whereas the second would rather block the right person than let the wrong one in. So the term ERR, or equal error rate, is basically a measure of the overall quality of a speaker verification system. This is when the probability of a false acceptance is equal to the probability of a false rejection. VoiceSentry employs machine learning algorithms which dynamically adapt to the unique speaker's confidence threshold on each use to continuously optimize the accuracy. So I hope you found that interesting, and I'll pass you back to my colleague Ian, who has something very interesting to say about GDPR now.
Okay, thanks again. So in the slide coming up, I'd like to summarize Acculab's current understanding of VoiceSentry in relation to its evaluation and use in the context of the GDPR. So please note that this information isn't legal opinion. So I'd always recommend that you take independent legal advice, particularly in respect to your specific circumstances. So disclaimers out of the way, where is the GDPR applicable? The GDPR addresses data processing, including the storage of inherently identifiable personal data. Because it covers data processing, the regulations don't address interpretations or identifications that might be made by one person about another. For example, if a person identifies another solely by listening to a speech recording, that doesn't constitute the processing of personal data. Nonetheless, speech recordings are personal data because they're produced by living people. However, if the recordings are anonymous, or you can anonymize them, then they're not addressed by the regulations. I mention speech recordings because VoiceSentry uses recordings. It accepts, and after use it deletes speech recordings. So prior to deleting those recordings, it processes them to produce a voice print, as we've been hearing, and it stores that without any means for recovery against an identifier that is provided to it along with the recordings, as David was saying. Voice prints are personal data that are considered to be biometric data, and as such are regarded by the GDPR as sensitive personal data, or a special category of personal data. You can find that in Article 9.1 of the regulation. Note that voice prints produced solely by processing anonymous speech data that isn't within the scope of the regulations are not themselves within the scope of the regulations. So accordingly, VoiceSentry is being used in a test, evaluation, or development activity whereby it is being tested using anonymous speech data, then that activity isn't addressed by the GDPR. On the other hand, when VoiceSentry is used in a production environment and is used to verify the identity of real individuals, then it is clearly subject to the GDPR. That's because for any real application, the enterprise using VoiceSentry will be processing a great deal of existing personal data that is already subject to the GDPR. So names, addresses, telephone numbers, account details, policy numbers, etc., etc. And now, in addition to that, it will be associating that data via an enrollment ID with the biometric data created and stored in VoiceSentry. So accordingly, in a production environment, the VoiceSentry software and the voice prints stored within it must be considered in the category of sensitive personal data. Therefore, it must be protected and otherwise dealt with according to the GDPR. So I'm going to hand you back to Richard now, and he's going to introduce a demo of VoiceSentry.
Okay, thanks, Ian. So as we've seen, VoiceSentry can be integrated into your existing infrastructure in a number of ways. So here we're going to show you a quick web demo. And in this demonstration, David is going to log in and register his voice and then verify that his voice will be able to give him access. Once David's done that, I'm going to try and use my voice to see that if I can access his account.
So here we have a web demo of VoiceSentry. I'm going to enroll on the platform and then perform a number of verifications. And then my colleague Rich will try and gain access to my account. So I'll be emailed an enrollment number, which I need to enter. And now I'm going to perform a number of enrollment recordings. My voice will let me in. My voice will let me in. My voice will let me in. So the voice print is now being created, and then I'll perform a number of verification attempts. My voice will let me in. My voice will let me in. So here you can see I've been enrolled and verified on the platform successfully. So now my colleague Rich will attempt to verify and get into my account.
My voice will let me in.
So as you can see, he has been detected as an imposter. And in a real life situation in a contact center, if it was the valid user who was detected as an imposter, maybe there was someone speaking in the background, something like that, then you may allow them to have some subsequent attempts at verification. But eventually you would put them through to an agent for additional ID&V checks. And once they were verified to be the valid account holder, they may be given the chance to update their voice print. And this is what we're providing here within the demonstration. But obviously, in this instance, we know that Rich is an imposter, so we click no. So yeah, so here you see an example of VoiceSentry in action.
Okay, so for the next part of the webinar, this now involves you guys. So we're going to answer some of the questions that have come in during today's presentation. And as a reminder, you can still submit questions through the control panel. So we're going to start to address those questions now. And I think Chris is going to take the first one.
Yeah, so we've got one. Someone's asking if it's free to trial VoiceSentry and how to do so. So the good news is it is free to trial VoiceSentry. And guess what? You also get some free example code and free training with that. So all I'd say is if you send an email to sales@aculab.com and just say that you're interested in trialing VoiceSentry, we'll discuss the details with you. But basically, we've set up a sandbox environment where you can trial VoiceSentry for free. And also, like I mentioned before, documentation, example code, and so on to let you hit the ground running. So just drop us an email, and the email address again is sales@aculab.com, and we'll get you going.
Okay, this is David. We've also had a question about what programming language does VoiceSentry support. So as I mentioned, the administrative and verification services within VoiceSentry are provided via a REST API. So they're inherently language independent or language agnostic. So as long as the programming language that you're looking to use can send web requests and process a response, then you can use it. So you could use Python, PHP, Ruby, C#, C++, and obviously if you need assistance with wrappers, we can provide those.
We've got another one come in asking if our system supports Italian. So initially David mentioned what the system supports. So in terms of the voice biometrics, the speaker verification, that is language independent. So you can use any language to use the system to verify your voice. But in terms of speech recognition, so if you wanted to use the additional part of VoiceSentry, which is to detect and recognize digits and yes and no, that's speech recognition, and that supports Italian, yes, along with other languages like Spanish and English and so on. But just to recap, voice recognition and voice biometrics, they're two different things, and our biometrics is speech independent or language independent.
Okay, so this is Ian speaking here. There's a question about how sensitive is it to background noise. So I suppose the answer to that is like, fair enough. In certain circumstances, it might be adversely affected by background noise, but we've done our best to make it robust to background noise. And the key thing to say is that there's a difference between background noise and somebody or people speaking in the background. So if you've got other voices mixed up with the voice of the person trying to be verified, then that's going to cause an issue potentially. So the main thing to think about when implementing a system is to enable a number of retries so that the person can turn around and say shut up to his kids in the background or whatever it might be, and have another go. But bear in mind some publicity that was on the BBC last year. You don't want to allow go after go after go, so don't forget to limit your retries.
So we've also had a question about using the standard settings. What are the likelihoods of false positives? So as Chris talked about in his section, the sort of the standard metric, or one of the standard metrics for looking at the capabilities of a speaker recognition, a speaker verification platform is the EER. Equal error rate, and testing of our platform has shown an equal error rate of less than 2%.
There's a question coming about the limit of enrollments. What is the limit of enrollments allowed in the platform? The Voiceprints interface has an option where you can limit the amount of enrollments on the system, and also you can limit the amount of verifications per day. So it's very configurable via the administration interface, that limit and the verifications per day limit.
Yeah, and just like to add on that it's possible to sort of increase the size of the storage used for the database within VoiceSentry to increase the number of enrollments that can be stored on the platform. We've also had a question about what is the cost per transaction when using VoiceSentry, and is there any information about that on the web interface? The pricing for VoiceSentry is based on the number of transactions per day. So a license that you purchase is for the throughput that you require for your platform, and on the web interface you can see information about the number of transactions that you've performed that day, and also information on previous per day amounts.
Okay, that's all the questions. Obviously, you can always contact us with any other questions that you might have on sales@aculab.com.
And any questions that we haven't got back to yet?
Yeah, so if you did ask a question during the webinar and we haven't had time to get back to it, then we will obviously get back to you in person after the webinar has finished shortly. So just some closing remarks. So really the message for developers and OEM partners is that VoiceSentry will help you present a solution to solve the authentication problems of your users. The benefits of VoiceSentry are fourfold. Not only will it help to mitigate fraud and security risks for your customers, it will significantly improve the customer experience. That's not inconsequential in this day and age of omni-channel contact center operations. With VoiceSentry, you can offer your customers speed and convenience for their clients and users, i.e. anyone who needs to be authenticated before accessing accounts or services. In addition to happier clients, your customers' agents will be more engaged, motivated, and productive. The frustration of agent-led ID&V can be replaced with a reduction in average call time and other metrics, all of which lead to cost savings and a rapid ROI. Overall, customers of a solution offering voice biometrics using VoiceSentry will lose less to fraudsters, save on legal processes from not having to pursue said fraudsters, and save on compensation or reimbursement payments. So if you want to know who goes there, just ask VoiceSentry. So to end it then, so thank you to Ian, David and Chris, and more importantly, thank you to everyone for giving up their time to attend today's webinar. If you do have any further questions, you can always contact us on sales@aculab.com, or you can always use the live chat function on our website, aculab.com. So on behalf of Aculab and our presenters, thank you for joining us for this webinar and enjoy the rest of your day.